President Trump stunned the global business world this week as the White House announced sweeping new tariffs targeting China. "Nobody knows more about trade than me," he declared as the U.S. slapped tariffs on Chinese goods, marking the start of one of the largest trade wars in modern history. It was 2018, and China and the United States began a tit-for-tat escalation that sent shockwaves through the world economy. But while everyone was focused on the clash of these giants, an unexpected player quietly seized the moment to become enormously wealthy: Vietnam. Yet Vietnam's recent economic miracle is rooted in decades of preparation. 1986, Vietnam launched the GMGI reforms, inspired by China's economic opening, transitioning to a market economy. President Trump's trade war on China imposed a 25% tariff on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods, from semiconductors to textiles, raising the cost of Chinese-made products in the U.S. Trump's strategy was straightforward: make it more expensive to produce abroad, pushing American companies to bring manufacturing home. But China hit back quickly, slapping $60 billion of U.S. goods with retaliatory tariffs. After all, the U.S. boasts world-class infrastructure, a highly skilled workforce, and robust legal protections. But Trump's tariffs targeted low-skilled blue-collar manufacturing jobs that are highly cost-sensitive. Take Yanfeng, one of the largest zones, spanning 80 square kilometers and hosting global titans like Apple, Canon, and Samsung's largest phone factory, which produces over half of Samsung's worldwide smartphone supply. This occurs when goods made in China are sent to Vietnam, relabeled as made in Vietnam, then shipped to the U.S. to evade tariffs. Evidence is stark. Since 2018, Chinese exports to Vietnam have surged over 70%. Key products like electric batteries jumped 350%, integrated circuits 37%, and electronic chemicals 57%. And reduced dependence on transshipment, it might secure its place as Asia's next great economic power. But whether it will continue its spectacular ascent or suffer a sharp reversal remains an open question, and only time will tell. U.S. officials are aware and frustrated, but inspecting even a fraction of the 11 million containers entering American ports annually is nearly impossible. Meanwhile, Vietnam profits massively. Transshipment drives investment in ports and logistics, creates jobs, and boosts government revenues through port fees, customs duties, and taxes. Vietnam currently has 563 industrial zones, with 106 more planned, sitting along the South China Sea maritime superhighway, carrying nearly a third of the world's trade. Vietnam boasts deep-water ports and logistics networks that allow shipping to the U.S. West Coast in just 16 days, but the story could end as quickly as it began, with Trump back in office. He's pushing policies to target not only Chinese products but all foreign producers, including Vietnam. If these tariffs are imposed, it would devastate Vietnam's economy. Nearly a quarter of its GDP depends on exports to the U.S. In industries like metal processing and electronics are almost entirely reliant on American consumers. A 20% tariff could plunge Vietnam into recession, wiping out millions of new jobs and years of progress. Compared to 30 days from many Chinese inland factories, Vietnam has also locked in key trade deals, offering free trade with China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and, uniquely among developing nations, the European Union. With the U.S. federal minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, compared to Vietnam's minimum wage of just 94 cents an hour, manufacturing in Vietnam was dramatically cheaper. As tensions escalated, tariffs grew harsher, averaging over 20% on both sides. In the past decade, Vietnam's manufacturing output has more than doubled. Entire regions have been transformed, with sprawling industrial parks rising almost overnight. But this didn't happen by accident. Vietnamese governments have spent decades laying the groundwork to position the country as China's replacement on the global stage. Vietnam now ranks among Asia's top countries for English proficiency, and college enrollment grows yearly. While a few American manufacturers saw temporary benefits, many companies dependent on Chinese imports suffered rising costs and shrinking demand. Worse still, the promised return of manufacturing jobs to the U.S. never materialized. The Federal Reserve later found the tariffs led to a 1.4% reduction in U.S. manufacturing employment, and only half the regular rate for the next 9. Compared to the U.S.'s 21% corporate tax, the savings are immense. Second, Vietnam's single-party system, while controversial, enables the government to make swift, favorable deals with investors. For example, in 2024, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang met President T. Lam to discuss AI and semiconductor projects, with Vietnam pledging to provide optimal conditions for NVIDIA's investment. Huang declared Vietnam the company's second home, promising AI research and data centers nationwide. These reforms legalized private enterprise, welcomed foreign investment, and embraced international trade. A major reason was Vietnam. Today, Vietnam exports over $120 billion worth of goods to the U.S. annually, more than a quarter of its economy. Since the trade war began, Vietnamese exports to the U.S. have increased nearly fivefold, with average incomes in Vietnam nearly doubling. Some estimates suggest the tariffs directly created over 2 million new jobs in Vietnam, fueling one of the fastest economic transformations in modern history. The impact was dramatic. In 1990, over 60% of Vietnam's population lived in extreme poverty. But by 2010, this had fallen below 10%. But instead of returning to the U.S., businesses looked to Vietnam. Giants like Apple, Intel, and Foxconn quickly shifted major manufacturing operations there, investing millions. Just months ago, SpaceX announced a $12 billion investment plan for Vietnam. Yet despite this progress, Vietnam remained overshadowed by China, struggling to carve out space in global markets. After the Vietnam War ended in 1975, the country was left devastated, its economy shattered, its infrastructure in ruins. The Communist Party took full control, merging North and South Vietnam and adopting a Soviet-style planned economy, where the state controlled nearly every aspect of life, from housing to employment. And surprisingly, this system failed to deliver the post-war recovery Vietnam desperately needed. By 1985, most Vietnamese lived in deep poverty, with an average income of just $238 a year. By 2024, Vietnam had emerged as the third fastest growing economy in the world, outpacing China, the US, and Singapore. In just a decade, its income per capita nearly doubled. It might seem surprising for a nation often associated with communism, but a unique opportunity was unfolding. As Trump pushed to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., Vietnam's exports to America skyrocketed, soaring by nearly 500% in 10 years. Today, exports to the U.S. account for a quarter of Vietnam's economy, creating new wealth, expanding education, and dramatically improving life for ordinary Vietnamese. But there is a darker side. Vietnam's economic boom is now deeply tied to the U.S., and a single policy shift or tweet could unravel years of progress. How did Vietnam end up in such a high-stakes position? Will its meteoric rise continue, or will it face a sudden economic collapse? Walking through the streets of Vietnam's cities today feels remarkably similar to bustling hubs in China modern. Vibrant and full of energy. With the country teetering on the brink of collapse, change became inevitable. That changed almost overnight in 2018. Why did Trump's tariffs fail to bring jobs back? So how did Vietnam manage to benefit so spectacularly? Once the U.S. imposed tariffs on China, many companies began rethinking their supply chains, seeking alternatives to avoid added costs. This may seem counterintuitive, given that America's GDP per capita is roughly 22 times higher than Vietnam's. Since 2018, American companies have poured into Vietnam, making it one of the world's most important manufacturing hubs. A key to Vietnam's success has been its network of industrial zones, dedicated areas designed to attract international manufacturers. What makes these zones so attractive? First, cost incentives. Foreign investors pay no corporate tax for the first 4 years. Yet behind Vietnam's explosive rise lies a controversial and often illegal practice: transshipment. Why did Vietnam, and not another country, become the epicenter of this shift? Geography. All this has made Vietnam the global alternative to China. The coming years will be pivotal. Vietnam can diversify its trade partners, strengthen domestic industries,